And now Christo wanted me to talk Superman. And wouldn't you know it, I would love to talk Superman. As I sit here in my Kingdom Come Superman shirt. Um, I was thinking about this earlier, and I just, let's talk. Let's talk a little Superman. Um, because the other day, I'm trying to think about how to start this. When I think about Superman, I think about actors in search of their second movies. I think about actors seeking redemption because I love redemption. I love a good redemption story, whether it's like real life, whether it's like what happened with like Robert Downey Jr. and all that he overcame and being from, the demons he wrestled with and going to prison and all that stuff to suddenly turning it all around and doing what he's done since. So whether it's personal redemption or whether it's big screen redemption, I love that too. I think about like Ryan Reynolds. All right. When Ryan Reynolds was cast as Wade Wilson, as Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine, a lot of people were very excited. Like, whoa, Ryan Reynolds can do this. He's got the physique. He's got the humor. You remember he rose to prominence in National Lampoon's Van Wilder. So he already had a reputation for being that like smart ass, smug, wisecracking type of guy. So it was like, wait a minute, this is perfect casting. This is huge. And then what did they do? They ruined it. The Wade Wilson that we got in X-Men Origins Wolverine, he did not do the character justice one bit. And Ryan Reynolds must have walked away from that feeling like, man, that was my chance. I got cast in this iconic comic book role that I like. Ryan Reynolds has been a Deadpool guy for a while. So imagine being cast to be this character that you already are very invested in. And the fans know what you can do, and you know what you could do. You have all these ideas, but ultimately you're in a movie that tarnishes your portrayal of that character. For the entire movie-going public, now they've seen a bastardized version of this character that you were so excited to play. And ordinarily, that's the end of the story. That's it. But in the case of Ryan Reynolds, he got to redeem himself. Fox, with a very sort of open-minded look at their X-Men franchise at the time, back when the X-Men belonged to Fox, they allowed Ryan Reynolds to reprise the role in a movie that has nothing really to do with X-Men Origins Wolverine. And in a way, not in a way, it breaks the fourth wall and makes fun of what happened in that movie. So it's a movie commenting on another movie. Ryan Reynolds was able to basically own Deadpool. He was able to show us that he was born to play this character. That first Deadpool movie was a freaking sensation. People forget about that. It was a rated R movie about a character that's only really been around for like had only been around for about 14 years at the time or something like that. No, my math is all terrible. Like 20 something years. Okay. Right. I think he came out like 93, early 90s, around then. So here you have this newish character that not a lot of people know. He's not a household name. People forget that movie turned a bigger profit than BVS did 2 months later. And BVS had Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and the death of Superman and the Dark Knight Returns references. It's this huge monumental story. It's the it's the stepping stone to Justice League. Deadpool got a better return than that did. People were more excited about that rated R movie about an obscure character than they ended up being for BVS. But that's not what I wanted to get into just now. So Ryan Reynolds got his redemption, and that that warms my heart. But when it comes to Superman, part of what I want for Henry Cavill is for him to get his redemption, for him to get a true follow-up to Man of Steel, where we can really see the character grow, where we can really see, him adapt perhaps one of Superman's more iconic books and really make the character his own and fly off in a different sort of direction. Because Cavill has teased plenty of times over the years that he's excited to play a more classic version of the character. And I'm dying to see him do that. And in a couple of days, we're going to be tweeting out, there's going to be a hashtag to try to get Henry back. Actually, it's not in a couple of days. It's tomorrow, November 7th. I'm going to be part of a tweeting campaign using the hashtag Henry Cavill Superman, so that just as we did on September 7th, we can get that hashtag trending worldwide as we try to get this guy a chance to tell his Superman story, to continue his Superman story, because there's a lot of people who want to see what's next. There have been people clamoring for a sequel to Man of Steel for 7 years now. So, listen, I'm in on it. I'm in on wanting to see Henry get his redemption. Because, listen, as I said, I love a good redemption story. But, there's another actor who I've been waiting for their redemption for 14 years, since 2006. And that's Brandon Routh. Because while a bunch of you have been in this, sort of, whatever you want to call it, been in this limbo with your Superman for the last 7 years, I was in that same boat. Everyone who liked Superman Returns, everyone who wanted to see what was going to come next, even the people who didn't love it, but were still excited to see if Singer could pull off an epic sequel. Because remember, he had already sort of established a precedent with X-Men, that the first movie is just kind of like setting the table and kind of, getting all the pieces in place. And then X2 was a whole exponential leap in quality and in storytelling and everything. X2 took, everything to another level. And Singer himself had teased that he was going to Wrath of Khan it with part 2, with his sequel, which was going to be called Man of Steel. He was going to, take things to a whole other level. So for those of us who maybe didn't love or even really like Superman Returns, there was still curiosity to see what will the sequel to this be like. How will it improve on Superman Returns? And what will it add to the story that'll make it feel less derivative of the Reeve Superman movies? And for years, that dragged on. It's something I've discussed here on the show before, so longtime listeners know of my pain. For years and years, there were all these teases, and even as far as right before Man of Steel became official, there was still a glimmer of hope that Routh was going to be involved. I remember when they announced that, quote-unquote, Christopher Nolan was going to be godfathering a Superman reboot. Brandon Routh had this very sort of clunky Kansas Clark Kent way of responding to that, where he's like, I hope the brothers Nolan will consider me for their movie, The Brothers Nolan. But, he was still for years waiting for that chance to play the role again. And us as fans of his, we were waiting to see, is he going to get a chance to do his next chapter in this story? Let's see him grow in the role, and let's see him take those building blocks from the first movie, and now let's see where we go from there. So me quedé con las ganas. Sorry, that's a Cuban phrase. Or that's what we say in my family, where I was left wanting for years and years. And then they announced Man of Steel and that it's a complete hard reboot. And here's Henry Cavill. And now he's the new guy in town that I have to try to get used to. And listen, he ended up, relatively winning me over enough to where I'm going to be, tweeting out hashtag Henry Cavill Superman tomorrow. He won me over enough to get me curious for what comes next. But my allegiances kind of remain at their core to Brandon Routh. And listen, I was willing to kind of let that all wither away. I was going to let it just go until I saw him in that suit for the Arrowverse crossover last year. I mean, the guy has grown so much as an actor. He's so effortlessly Superman now that it's like, it just screams, this guy deserves another shot. And the beauty of it is he doesn't have to replace Henry, because thanks to what's going to be going on in the Flashpoint movie, we're going to be introduced to multiple Batmen. We're going to be introduced to multiple versions of, to the idea that there are multiple versions of these characters. So in theory, Routh could do his thing on HBO Max, while Cavill, if they decided, could do his thing on the big screen. And clearly they're not worried about that stuff because we just had Joaquin Phoenix's Joker have his own billion-dollar earning movie, but we also got Jared Leto's Joker popping up in Zack Snyder's Justice League coming up soon. And then there's also rumors, there's been little whispers that the Joker is going to factor in somehow in Reeves the Batman, even if he's not the central villain, even if he's not, going to be the central villain for any of the next few movies. There have been teases that his Joker is also alive in this world, and that one of the actors that's been announced so far is secretly playing him. So clearly, Jim Lee and DC and Warner Brothers, they're not too worried about flooding the market with different versions of the characters as long as there's a market for it. As long as the audience can handle that, they're going to keep cranking out alternate versions of these characters. They're into that. This whole thing is multiverse nowadays. So Brandon could get another appearance. And I'm not saying that because, yes, there have been rumors, but in general now we live in a world where that could happen. And I, as a Superman fan, that would be such talk about a redemption story. If he were to get to adapt another Superman book, if they were to want to do even Kingdom Come, do the whole thing as a mini-series event, and you have him in there as that version of Superman. Whatever the case, or an original story, in my heart of hearts, nothing would make me happier than to see Routh Superman fly again. So when people ask me about what is it I want when it comes to Superman, or what I think the future is for Superman in pop culture, listen, that's a complicated question, and I could talk about this for hours and hours. But all I know is that if in some version of Superman's future, there's a way to have Brandon Routh with that long red cape on playing that part and doing it the way he does it nowadays, sign me up. Nothing would make me happier. I've been waiting for that for 14 years. And seeing his acting and how it's grown, because that's something that, in Superman Returns, he was a young, very sort of inexperienced actor. And I remember sort of noticing that, by following up with Bryan Singer's video diaries from the set that he was releasing on bluetights.net every week or every few weeks. By following that, somehow or other, I learned that they filmed a lot of his stuff chronologically. So a lot of the stuff in the early part of the movie, it really is from Brandon Routh's first days on the set. And then as they wore on and we get into the Superman stuff, that was months and months later. Basically the film, while most movies film out of sequence, when it came to Brandon Routh's portrayal of Superman, a lot of his arc was shot chronologically. And I swear to this day, you go watch that movie and you watch his acting grow from the beginning of the movie to the end. where in the beginning he seems a little nervous, a little tentative. His Clark, which is supposed to be a little timid, but was way more timid than I think he was even supposed to be. To me, it always read like Routh was like still just kind of finding his bearing, suddenly being at the center of a $250 million Superman movie. I feel like his portrayal early in the movie, you could feel that nervous 23-year-old with the pressure on his shoulders. And by the end, you see what could be a very special Superman. So if that was true in 2006, where it looked like he grew as an actor over the course of just the months of filming that movie, he's grown so much since then that the scenes he had, both as Clark Kent and as Superman in the Arrowverse Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, all his scenes, I thought, that's Superman. There he is. There's no, I don't have to take an imaginary leap. I mean, the suit was gorgeous. He filled it out like Superman should fill it out. He had the voice. He had everything. I mean, it was... it was a pretty special experience seeing him back and hearing the John Williams music again. It was like, that is the Superman I grew up on. That's my guy. That is my Superman. And now if HBO Max could somehow lead to me getting more of that, I mean, I'm insanely giddy at the prospect of it. And one of these days, I'm going to start laying out for you guys my pitch, because I have two different Superman stories that I want to tell, and they're very different, and because they have different, they're for different types of projects. One is basically if we're going to treat this like a serious HBO Max miniseries event, or not even necessarily a miniseries, but treat it like Watchmen, like an 8-episode with Hollywood production value, treated seriously with grit and amazing, overall style and cinematography and strong scripting. So I have a Superman that's geared towards that sort of treatment. And then I have Superman that's more a traditional film trilogy. If they were to want to, either reboot it or possibly we could, I don't think in my reboot we could have Cavill in it. So if I pitch that one, it's in the hypothetical that we're full on rebooting, because I don't really have a story in mind that continues anything that we've seen so far. I kind of have I have a from scratch reboot idea that I want to share with you guys. But yeah, so when it comes to Superman, that's where my head's at these days, where I'm really happy that they're bringing all these Batmen in and that they're opening the doors to have all these different versions of these characters, because deep down, I'm waiting for Brandon Routh to get his redemption, just as I'm hoping Henry Cavill ultimately gets his. Although, if I'm being honest, if I had to choose one or the other, if for some reason there's like a genie who showed up and they were like, all right, you can either get more Brandon Routh Superman or more Henry Cavill Superman, I'm sorry. I'm going with the Routh Superman. I'm sorry. But it's just the truth. But that said, hashtag Henry Cavill Superman. Let's try to get that man his cape back so that we could see what kind of story he would want to tell. And look, I think ultimately, if we see him back, if we see Henry Cavill Superman back, the person we're going to have to thank for that is Dwayne Johnson. And I've brought this up before. But I really think that because of the way that Dwayne is interlocked with DC, where it's not just him as an actor being hired to be in a DC project. No, he's coming on as a producer. He's coming on as an entire brand with his $3 production company. And he's dying to interact with Superman. He's got Henry Cavill in his stable there at $3 because Danny Garcia, his ex-wife, manages both of them. So if we get more Henry Cavill Superman, which I think we're gonna, I think it's going to be tied very closely to the Shazam Black Adam sort of corner of the DC Films universe. And what's interesting about that is it's kind of a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, okay, that keeps Henry alive. Granted, not in the capacity we'd like. It doesn't give him his own movie, but it gives him a prominent role in one or two of these upcoming Shazam Black Adam movies. Because in my mind, it's all linked. I know that they've been very sort of like hesitant to come out and say it. But listen, Black Adam is one of Shazam's, arguably his biggest villain. So they're going to have to be building towards that, even if they're not playing that hand right now publicly too hard. So the way I see it, we're going to have Black Adam, we're going to get into Shazam 2, and then that's ultimately going to lead to a Black Adam Shazam movie. So I feel like Superman can have a place in any or all of that. And I could see how Dwayne Johnson and his considerable clout could make that happen. So the reason I say it's a double-edged sword, though, is that on the other hand, we're learning that something that's true in one of these movies or one of these franchises is no longer necessarily going to be true across all of DC films, right? Because with DC, with the Flash movie, we're going to be opening the doors on this thing and showing the audience alternate versions. Bringing Michael Keaton back basically gives Jim Lee and DC and whoever is in charge of the film end of things, it's going to give them the ultimate creative freedom when it comes to, do we have to use Henry Cavill for Superman or can we start from scratch? Because having Michael Keaton in there and the message that's going to send, and having Ben Affleck in there all in the same movie, it's going to basically give the head of DC all the creativity and wiggle room in the world with which to do things with Superman. They couldn't do that prior to all this multiverse stuff. So prior to all this, if they were going to use Henry in Shazam or Black Adam, then they would almost feel like you'd have to think like an obligation to, well, okay, if that Superman is living on, then naturally any Superman project that we're going to produce for theatrical release needs to have that Superman because he is still the active Superman. But now that we're in this whole multiverse thing with the multiple Jokers and the multiple Batman and the multiple Flashes and the multiple everything, now they don't have an obligation to use Henry Cavill anymore. So it's really going to be, I think we're going to see him in those Shazam Black Adam movies. I suspect that if somehow there isn't a Superman reboot in development by the time those movies come out, because remember, this is all going to take time. There are stars of Shazam 2 who haven't even seen the script yet. Shazam 2 is not filming yet. And Black Adam is not filming yet. So it's going to take a while for us to get to these places where we're seeing Henry Cavill back as Superman. So assuming that in the years leading up to those movies, where we get to see Henry again, if there isn't a reboot already on the way, then yeah, it stands to reason that if Henry were to create a lot of buzz in those movies, and suddenly there's this whole, huge groundswell of people who love this version of Superman, then I could see him after that getting his own movie again. But again, we're talking, it might be 2025 at that point, 12 years after Man of Steel. So we're really kind of stretching it here, So I unfortunately think what's most likely is that the next time we see a solo Superman, it's going to be with a different actor. Not Brandon Routh, not Henry Cavill, but an all-new guy is going to be the star of the next solo Superman. But we're still going to see Henry Cavill Superman again, I think, in the Dwayne Johnson universe within DC. Because listen, he's getting a lot of creative carte blanche. He's bringing in the Justice Society. Dwayne Johnson has been very hands-on with this whole Black Adam verse that he's building out. And we know Shazam's part of that. So I think he's going to get his long-awaited confrontation with Superman. Fans of Henry Cavill's Superman are going to get to see him in that confrontation. So they're going to feel good to have Henry back. But ultimately, I think we might have to say goodbye to the notion of Henry getting solo movies, just because time is of the essence. And unless it gets greenlit like tomorrow or in the next, even give it a year, even if it gets greenlit in the next year, we're unlikely to see it until 2023, 2024, which is going to be over 10 years since Man of Steel came out. So, the clock is ticking on Henry's future and Henry's prospects for another solo movie. Because let's face it, right now, and for the last several years, Warner Brothers has been lukewarm. They've been lukewarm about the idea of Henry Cavill as Superman. So there's nothing that's going to change that short of his appearances in Shazam and Black Adam, possibly, if he does show up in Black Adam. Short of those creating a whole ton of energy, I don't think that the studio even has a real need to consider him for another solo movie. We know that they're not. So regardless of my opinions on the matter, the studio's just not, they're not there right now. But I do get the sense that they would be open to the right pitch. So that's why the clock is ticking too. Because if someone comes in like a Matt Reeves, but wants to basically shepherd their own Superman, trilogy, and they have this great detailed idea for what their story is going to be, and they could, bring it to vivid life in the way that Reeves seems to be doing with the Batman, I think that's going to take a priority over them even considering bringing back Henry. So that's why it's, time is of the essence, because someone is going to pitch a great Superman movie. And in the meantime, Henry is waiting to possibly not show up again in the role until Shazam is happening, until Shazam 2 is happening. So that's kind of my take on Henry Cavill's prospects moving forward, and kind of my piece on Superman in general. Though I gotta say, with everything that's going on right now in these United States, I cannot help but feel like a really well-told Superman story would be extremely timely and extremely relevant right now. Something that examines what it is to be an American. Something that examines what it is to be an immigrant in America. Something that examines America's place in the world. But of course, using Superman as the metaphor. Because right now, one could argue that our nation is one that's at war with itself. So now let's metaphorically put that on our hero. Let's put our true blue Boy Scout hero in today's America. And I think you have a riveting story. Because I've always said, you don't have to make Superman dark and ethically complicated. You put him in a world where the world around him is compromised and ethically complicated. You tell a story similar to Entavo Borrego, by the way, callback. He sent me the Blu-ray of this. Superman versus the Elite, where it's a perfect juxtaposition of a classic Superman in a modern world that wants to do without him, in a modern, cynical world that thinks that, being a true blue hero or being idealistic is somehow silly and undesirable. And in that story, Superman uses what he can do to prove some pretty substantial points. And I feel like if you were to borrow that element for an adaptation, now to kind of loop in Isaac Wolf's question, if you were to loop in the subtext of Superman the Elite into a really timely and relevant Superman story, where on the one hand, you have Clark Kent, intrepid reporter, trying to get to the bottom of corruption on the ground level, within our politics, within our elected officials, within all that. You have Clark dealing with things on that end, while you have Superman trying to deal with Brainiac. Brainiac in the form of the way we're all getting so automated, how we have Alexa and Siri, and every day there are new advances in artificial intelligence. Skynet is coming soon, some might argue. Well, let's use some of that and use Brainiac, and let's adapt that into our idea for Brainiac, and how it's Brainiac who's spreading all the fake news and misinformation and trying to get Earth to destroy itself. And Superman has to somehow figure out a way to stop Brainiac. There's a lot of ways to approach a Superman story right now, but I feel like the right story right now would make Superman hands down the most relevant superhero of them all. At a time when many would love to have written him off as being too old-fashioned, too altruistic, too idealistic, you put him in the right story, and he could be just what we need right now.